Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days growing up in Idaho. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Growing Up in Idaho, talking about the good old days. A few weeks ago, Sarah and I were visiting our hometown up in Salmon. If you didn't know, Salmon is located in central Idaho, and it's near the Continental Divide between Idaho and Montana. If you've ever heard of the famous Salmon River, well, that river flows right through town. And it's a big part of what keeps salmon alive, with boating and fishing and, of course, hunting and everything like that. If you're an outdoorsman, salmon's a good place. And for anyone who has any connection to salmon in any way, you've probably heard those people talk about how isolated the community is. Some people can't stand that and feel claustrophobic, but most people like the solitude the area provides. They like the idea of not breathing the same air as someone else, drawing from an old Louis L'Amour quote. Anyway, Sarah and I were in Salmon, and we spent most of our time visiting the places we knew and loved when we were kids growing up there. Sarah showed me some of the places I wasn't familiar with, kind of on her end of the valley, and I did the same for her. You have to understand that Sarah and I lived on opposite ends of the valley. She lived 7 miles north of town, and I lived 6 miles south. And believe me, I knew exactly how much gas it took in my 67 Chevelle Supersport to get to her house and back home again. And for those who really want to know, Sarah and I were close growing up. I started liking her when I was in the 8th grade, and she was just a little 7th grader running around the halls of the Brooklyn school. And it wasn't long before I convinced her to give me the time of day. She had a bunch of little boys chasing her around all over the place, as you can imagine. Anyway, we spent a lot of time in those days looking for peace and solitude, away from civilization, where, of course, we could do our homework. So when we were up there a few weeks ago, I spent a lot of time showing her some of the areas where I spent most of my childhood, at least when I wasn't with her. And so we visited the South Fork of Williams Creek, and we also drove through the beautiful Prow Creek Meadows. If you've ever had a chance to do that, if you're from the area and know that, you recognize that's a beautiful place. And those are two of the areas that we hunted and spent a lot of time when I was a kid. So in today's story, I've got some video recorded of some famous Indian writings. And these writings in this particular story are located down the Salmon River, 5 or maybe 6 miles down from Cove Creek. And I have to tell you a little disclaimer. For those who feel that all ancient artifacts and geology and things like that, including Indian writings on rock walls, are all sacred, I agree with you. I don't like to hear about folks who intentionally deface those types of things. But in telling this story, you have to understand the context of history. My grandpa, Harry Hicks, was 12 years old when he helped his dad run a pack train down the Salmon River. Apparently they supplied a lot of the miners and workers who were down there. Anyway, this would have been around 1928. And even though running that pack string was hard work, it wasn't always work and no play. Grandpa, like any kid, was allowed to explore and play. So during the downtime, Grandpa often swam across the river or rode his horse across and played on the other side. And why he did that, who knows? Who knows why kids do half the stuff they do, but that's what he did. And at this particular time, it was long before the road was built down there, the one that goes to Corn Creek. So to say that he grew up as an outdoorsman would be an understatement. Most of Harry Hicks' early life was spent roughing it. And so one day, while he was messing around on the other side of the river, he found some Indian writings. And let's go to the video so everyone can see those writings, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And you'll get a little history of an area of the Salmon River that you may not have known before. Grandpa would have been about 12 or 13 years old, and he said that he saw these Indian writings. There was this teepee here, and there was a few other things. And he wanted to make some of his own writings. And keep in mind, he is a kid who lived off the land and knew a lot about different things. And so he found the plants that the Indians used to make these writings, mixed them up, smashed them up, made his own dye. In his own words, he said these check marks up here, he used those to get the color right, the dye, the correct color on his dye. And after he got the dye correct, then he made his own writings. And he pointed out that he drew a few more teepees and stick figures and got bored and decided it was time to quit and leave. But as you can see, there's a little wall constructed around this area. Because when they built this road, they discovered the writings and realized that at least some of it was ancient Indian writings. And they didn't realize that part of it was Harry Hicks' writings. But at any rate, they built this little wall, and there used to be a sign right there that said Indian writings, so that people could point it out and recognize it. But we always thought it was kind of interesting, and it's been a story in the family for a lot of years. And then, interestingly, the year before Grandpa died, he and I and some of the other family were down here picnicking and messing around. And he told the story about these Indian writings. I thought it was worthy of passing along. And so there's another little piece of Idaho history that you may not have known. Thanks for listening. Growing up in Idaho, the good old days.